Hello, Tyler Bryden here. I hope everything is going well. Recording this a bit early today on a Friday. It's giving me a bit of anxiety that some more things are going to happen before the end of the day that I'm not going to hit. But every day, so much stuff is happening. I can't do it no matter what. It's another crazy week. We have Mark Carney now as Prime Minister here in Canada. That means it's Trudeau's last day, a big day for a lot of Canadians. Also, word that the Canadian election is coming, which means it's Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney. I'm still not sure I got Pierre's name pronunciation down right. We had a battle between Doug Ford and Donald Trump. There was more market chaos. Canada lowers rates. There's some weird stuff happening in BC. There's some details coming out about Anthropic and just a whole bunch more that I couldn't even include. Tesla show at the White House. Howard Lutnick everywhere on TV. Trump meets with NATO. More talk about Greenland. Just too much for one little brain to pack into one video. So I've done my best to continue the focus. Still feeling a little Canadian centric, but I just do feel there's such a significant role that Canada, US dichotomy is playing across the entire globe right now. Again, a new prime minister, a new election coming. We've got the G7 coming up, which I'm sure could have a lot of chaos as well. And of course, I'm a little Canadian boy myself here. And so looking through that lens and perspective, it is interesting to see at least Canadian politics on a more intriguing, interesting stage. Usually, most Canadians are not engaged in Canadian politics. And so we're focused on US politics and we're watching US TV shows. But I will say this whole tariff thing, along with the timing and Trudeau stepping down, has made Canadians seem a lot more engaged in politics itself. Could be good, could be bad, depending on how you look at it. But definitely means there's a lot to digest online, on TV, on Twitter /X, and we'll be breaking down some of that here today. So let's jump right in. Mark Carney is Prime Minister. It's official, Prime Minister of Canada on X. And then this is Mark Carney's ego, but I've just been sworn in as Canada's 24th Prime Minister. No one in Canada has ever voted for me in a general election. Now, let's get to work on my radical green agenda and making life less affordable for Canadians. We're going to get into this with Carney officially here in power. We don't exactly know how long, but it seems like an election is coming, and we'll talk about that. The attacks on him are already beginning. I think we're going to start to see more and more scrutiny placed on this man. Now, the actual election itself, he just dominated. 86% of the vote. Freeland got 8%. Gold and Bayless each got 3, so domination by him. It didn't seem like there was much of a chance for anyone else to enter this party, and we've talked about this before, but Christia and Carney intertwined through children and godfather status and all this stuff, so really just the same people at the end. And of course, the progressive Liberal Party picks the white male banker to lead the country. Now, there was definitely some skepticism of these results with it. Interesting little thought piece here. I'll drop in the YouTube description as always. Now, maybe a bit of stretch with Putin and all these things, but saying an outsider was installed at 86% vote. And this guy doesn't even have a seat in the House of Commons, barely spends time in Canada, has a bunch of passports, a bunch of different jobs, and we do not know his holdings or conflicts of interest. So, very unique situation for Canada where 0.3% of the Canadian population voted to install this prime minister. And Mark came out hot immediately saying tariffs are going to stay on until the US shows some respect, which led to a lot of events and back and forth this week that we'll get into throughout this video. And then the message from leaders come in. Shady Jagmeet, sellout Singh, still unsure what's going to happen with him, and say Carney doesn't want to call an election, which does seem to conflict with the news that's just coming out. He's really the reason why we're here, and he could easily continue to participate by not going against Carney in a vote of confidence and keeping him in power. And he doesn't seem like he's that hard to persuade with a couple small favors to get him to agree to that kind of stuff. We had Maxime Bernier. Congratulations. Unfortunately, you're no improvement to Justin Trudeau, and you don't deserve to be prime minister. You're a disconnected member of the globalist elite, central banker. You printed money. We know about this England stuff here now. And again, while he's pushing this net zero climate, continuing to benefit himself. So you can see not everyone so happy that he's here. But here we are in Canada with Mark Carney as prime minister, already hiring disgraced former ministers and doing work on his cabinet and his agenda. There is one bright side to this, though. That means that Trudeau is done, at least as Prime Minister. Got a nice picture of him on the way out. And if you didn't see my video last week, I did a nice section about some of the best moments and worst moments of Justin Trudeau and what his legacy will be leaving Canada. Saying thank you, Canada. First comment, now this guy's all over Twitter, but how many goodbyes are we going to get from you? Just shut up and leave. And it didn't seem like his exit went so well. Here he is leaving.
Trudeau, don't get to walk in the snow. Come on. No.
I haven't seen this video yet. Oh.
That's Trudeau leaving for the last time as PM. Here he goes. Trudeau rolling out. Get the heck. No. Hey. Goodbye.
Really nice snapshot of how many Canadians feel about Trudeau. So again, a little bit of hate, a little bit of joy on his last rollout there in Ottawa as Prime Minister. And here's his official message.
Canadians. I'm proud to have served a country full of people who stand up for what's right, rise to every occasion, and always have each other's backs when it matters most. This may be my last day here in this office, but I will always be boldly and unapologetically Canadian. My only ask is that no matter what the world throws at us, you always be the same.
Doesn't really make sense, to be honest. But last words from Trudeau. A little drama, a little zoom in there at the end. And again, a very big moment for Canadians. On his way out, revealed $11 billion spent on overseas gender programs during his tenure. And I expect that as he rolls out of here and maybe new power comes into with the new election, we'll start to see more and more uncovered on what happened in these last 10 years. And I don't think Canadians are going to like what they find. So back to Carney here, Canada's 24th Prime Minister. I've really tried to, I don't know if the term would be meditate on Carney here, but it's been really fascinating. Obviously, the divergent perspectives on him, on who he is, his background, his agenda, and what he brings to Canada. And I myself have been largely in, I would say, a more right-wing conservative echo chamber, especially through X and just the people that I'm interacting with in life. And so I tried to spend a bit of time just thinking, okay, what do people see in Carney, and is there any valid truths to that view versus the knee-jerk gut reaction that I've had to him, which is maybe truly coming from me, but could also be biased through the information intake that I have. And I didn't really arrive at much yet, but I had two interesting signals that just led to some of that desire for at least a deeper inspection. One was that Mark Carney was on the board for Bloomberg, which I'm a huge fan of Bloomberg, and I know there's some liberal leanings there, but at a core level, I've really enjoyed listening, watching Bloomberg, and have learned a lot from them. So I have a bit of connection to Bloomberg, and from all accounts, Bloomberg is recommending Carney and advocating for him. So I thought that was interesting. The second was Patrick Collison from Stripe, one of Stripe's co-founders, one of the brothers. And Carney was apparently on the board of Stripe. Now, I didn't know this, and I don't know how you even get to this position without having some knowledge and expertise. And someone asked Patrick on Twitter, how was Carney? And very simply said, he is awesome. So maybe that was Patrick trying not to get involved, but just the fact that such a high quality company, and I have a lot of respect for those two founders, signaled that there should be some respect for Carney was really interesting. And we'll talk about this later with a weird thing going on with him and Doug Ford right now. still moving forward, whether it's those little devilly teeth that he's got and just that gut reaction, the WEF European agenda that he's bringing along with these very conflicting stories about him wanting net zero, but then benefiting from coal going to China and all this stuff. Something just doesn't feel right. And so I'm still continuing with that view in my mind. I'm very open to pushback on that, and hopefully with some evidence more than just some of the comments that I've been getting on videos. Now we're seeing some divergence in the message between as soon as March 16th up to sometime in April, that there is going to be this election coming. Apparently, and this is pretty breaking, so I can't confirm all of this, but Carney has confirmed to the media that he's going to trigger an election before Parliament resumes, and that's on March 24th. So the excitement of it's finally happening here. But from a little inspection, it doesn't seem like there's official documentation or confirmation of this. So I'm still a bit skeptical. Maybe a little bit of optimism coming that might not have too much evidence behind it. And again, Carney seems to be prepping for this, taking out people like Mark Miller, who handled the immigration and obviously from most people's perspective did a horrible job of this. So he's getting rid of that. He's cutting the carbon tax. He's removing the capital gains increase that was supposed to go on. He's sequentially knocking out these objections that a lot of people have to him. That doesn't mean he's doing it perfectly, and he's talked about changing how the carbon tax program works and trying to pass it through to businesses versus consumers. Seems most people don't believe Carney with that, and so I do think he still has a lot of skepticism to climb up against. And we can see that in this picture here, where it's an image of Pierre visiting steelworkers versus Mark Carney visiting in. There was no steelworkers in this picture. He had his own people on his team dressing up in orange suits and appearing behind him. So the question is the optimism within the Liberal Party really shared by the rest of Canadians? And this is obviously leading to the Pierre and Carney showdown. And since this official arraignment of Carney, the attacks directly from Pierre and then the Conservative Party have not stopped. One path of attack being this field company he pulled to New York to avoid paying taxes, while obviously arguing Canadians need to pay taxes plus carbon taxes, and seems he's reversed policy there. But that seems more for popularity than because of his exact agenda. It is showing Pierre still maintaining leadership. Now that was March 11th from Innovative, and I don't know how quickly these things are changing. I'm sure we're going to get some new information soon with a +7 there since their last poll, but a very small sample size, only 906 people. Pierre responding to attacks on his own inexperience, especially business, where Mark Carney does have this background in finance at banks, board of director at Stripe, a huge long list. And that's some of the things I'm seeing a lot of Liberals sharing is the side-by-side of the credentials, where definitely Carney's been stacked compared to Pierre. And so Pierre is responding here.
And if you want any proof that my economic ideas are the best, the Liberals are all trying to pretend that they're copying them right before the election. All the big economic questions of the last 5 years, Mark Carney has been wrong and exactly wrong, and I have been right. I said 5 years ago the money printing would cause inflation. He said deflation was on the horizon. I turned out to be right. I said the carbon tax would drive up food prices, and it did. Drove them up 37% faster in Canada than in the United States of America. I was the first parliamentarian to predict that we would have the inflation crisis, while Carney, Freeland, Trudeau, and others were saying that we would not. I was the first one to be, along with my Conservative colleagues, fighting for pipelines. Pipelines now everyone claims that they support after opposing them for the last 10 years. So if Mr. Carney is so smart on economics, how is it that he was so wrong for so long on all of the economic issues? One thing I don't have experience with is taking jobs out of Canada, moving them to the United States, selling out our resource workers to support Middle Eastern resource workers. That's not the kind of experience that I have, but that's not the kind of experience that we want.
So there you go, Pierre, pretty crispy as always. And he seems like he's got a good line of attack down on Carney. I hope, will there be a debate? I don't know if there's a debate. I certainly wouldn't want to go up against Pierre in a debate. He is refined and has obviously been doing this a very long time. So great line there. some clips of Carney. I'm not going to force you to watch these. They'll be in the YouTube links, where he's really all over the place talking about his views and agendas. That doesn't really add up when you break it all down. Got 9 more minutes of Pierre attacking Carney. More and more scrutiny on this Brookfield operation. Looking at Carney's ministers and Trudeau's ministers and saying, really, they're the same people. Hashtag just like Justin. Pulling out direct quotes and information around Carney's time running the Bank of England, where inflation ran rampant even compared to other countries in the EU like Italy. And of course, using a loophole to avoid disclosing his finances and assets to Canadians. So Pierre, I know there's been some criticisms of him throughout the last few months as all of this has underwent, but has several strong arguments going into this Canadian federal election. And yeah, I believe this is going to be quite the battle, one in a very important moment for Canada on a global stage and choosing the direction that we want to go. And I know, just as an interesting signal, there was some note about Carney going to EU as his first international visit versus going down to the US and trying to work through this tariffs. So that relationship, that alignment, that agenda connected to the EU may come to fruition under Carney. Now, that wasn't all this week. We had Doug Ford, good old voted in third-time Premier of Ontario, doing some nasty work with electricity tariffs in the US. And here he is after Trump responded immediately, doubling tariffs. Ford pulled that back, says the government will lead negotiations. Lutnick, who, to be honest, is a pretty wild guy. I was watching him on Bloomberg. Wouldn't even call Doug Ford by his name and talked about how easy it was to break Ford down. Ford went to the US and now calling American family, loves Howard Lutt. I don't exactly know what's going on here with Ford.
Very close partners for many years. We want to make sure we continue building on that relationship. We feel that the temperature is being lowered. We feel the temperature is being lowered. And we've also agreed that we're going to have another meeting next week. And I think it's going to be very productive as well. We want the best outcome for both countries. We're like a family. And sometimes there's tension between families, but that was an extremely productive meeting. And I just want to thank the Secretary for the opportunity to go in there and stay this long and communicate. We shared a tremendous amount of views back and forth. And I'm feeling very positive.
Now, this was Trump's original message to Canada and the world after Ford did that. And so even though Ford's feeling that way, I'm not sure America is continuing to give him a little platform here. Feels the same way as a lot of Canadians. I feel we're not going to win a trade war with the US. And Howard Lutnick was talking about this himself. Like, Australia and Mexico are really operating the right way in regards to all these tariffs, whereas Canada and the EU are not. And it's really frustrating them. So I think first, the tariffs are seemingly penalizing Canadians who don't really want to be involved in this. And it's just increasing the temperature between the US. Now, a lot of people say, hey, we don't want to just roll over and die against the US. I do think there is a contextual awareness and understanding of the situation that we're in, the economic power, the military power, the proximity, and the agenda of the person in power in the White House right now, possibly one of the more powerful people, some would say most, in the world. Pierre, surprisingly aligned with the Liberal Party and this path forward where we're bringing retaliatory tariffs. Really interesting this week, China placing 100% tariffs on Canada, and it almost got swept under the rug for a bunch of reasons that are a little uncertain right now, but has a huge impact on Canada as well. I just think the media attention has been so zoomed in on this US-Canadian relationship. And then we got Trump here continuing his rhetoric about Canada as the 51st state.
Thing they have. As a state, it would be one of the great states anyway. This would be the most incredible country visually. If you look at a map, they drew an artificial line right through it between Canada and the U.S. Just a straight artificial line. Somebody did it a long time ago, many decades ago, and it makes no sense.
That rhetoric hasn't gone away. I think it's getting a little nerve-wracking for a lot of Canadians and the world in this imperialism that's coming from Trump, not just Canada, but Greenland and maybe expanding to other countries. Definitely focused up north, but I don't know if that's going to stop him completely. He's been talking about Panama and all this stuff as well. Now, there's one thing I wanted to highlight, which is really interesting, which is the Carney-Ford relationship. Ford, a conservative, but talking about Carney, understands finances like no other person. And so this is a really interesting conflict between the provincial party here in Ontario and Pierre and the Conservatives federally. You would think that Doug would want the Conservatives in. I'm not sure about these intentions and why he's saying this, and the memes have already begun around this relationship with the boys hugging with their pajamas on here. Man, AI is doing a lot right now. So I'm sure that will continue to develop, and we'll track that story. Throughout all this, there was some chaos in the market. Now, if I take a look today, where are we? I think there was a bit of a sea of green. Woo, we are looking green right now on the Friday to end this week, but that doesn't really quite make up for for what happened in the last few weeks, where we've moved into a technical correction and have reset back to pre-election times. Now, there's been messaging around the administration isn't looking at that, and that there was a lot of hype and bubbliness and overvaluation happening between the election and to now. But no one really likes to see those portfolio losses. And there's some huge skepticism and consumer sentiment challenges that are taking place right now, along with just businesses and how they're feeling about operating in times of such uncertainty. Here's a shot from earlier in the week, a little red. Warren Buffett, he's got $300 billion. He's feeling very good right now. Probably waiting for a little bit more correction, and then he'll start to deploy his cash. And I think when we see that cash being deployed, it may be one of those signals that we're nearing or hitting the bottom. The theory continues about Trump wanting to crash the market so he can get rates lower, with $9.2 trillion of U.S. debt either maturing or needing to be refinanced. And another signal, gold crossing $3,000 an ounce for the first time in history. Do you got some gold? So if I bring this back to Canada, rates lowered again, 2.75 now. A variable rate mortgage holder, I say yes. As a Canadian, knowing that our economy is being crushed by our own lack of productivity, as well as a decade of abandonment, and then tariffs and scrutiny from the U.S., not feeling so hot. One interesting note that Canadian foreign reserves are depleting. They're starting to sell bonds in USD apparently to hedge against its own currency collapse. It's starting to get a little over my head here now, but we're draining foreign reserves, and we got zero gold in the books. Shout out to Pearson Airport for a massive gold robbery. One other quick note here. I'm just going to highlight this. I don't know enough about it, but it's starting to pop up where we've got BC Premier Eby, NDP, and this was a little bit of a controversial election where there was some effery happening behind the scenes. I don't fully understand this yet. I would love some insight to it, but giving him an emergency power to bypass the legislature for 2 years. And there's very few checks on his authority. He can rule like a dictator over any part of BC life and is using Trump as his justification. Will this come to the rest of Canada? I think there's huge concerns about this right now, especially with the installing of Mark Carney that just happened. I'll drop this in the YouTube video if you want to explore more. So that's it for politics. The weeks are just wild. And I definitely think, I felt this the first time Trump was in power, but the productivity losses that are created because of the shock and awe that is taking place, I don't know if that's quantified, but I feel like it should be. Now, I'll end on tech, as I always do, with a few interesting releases. I can't not talk about the Agents SDK from OpenAI. I'm still diving into this a bit, but we know that people are looking at the future of tech, and OpenAI has continued to be a forerunner as these technologies emerge. With this, what looks to be multimodal, multi-step agents using OpenAI's well-developed APIs and documentation with tools built directly in, really valuable ones, web search, file search, and computer use, and not just supporting one, but multi-agent flows. You've also got tools, you've got knowledge and memory, guardrails, and then orchestration. And there's a great thread from Min Choi here, shout out, about why this is important. one of the interesting things was this idea of handoffs between agents where they can delegate tasks to other specialized agents. So this is really interesting where you have a team of specialists working together, handling complex workflows, and even having fine-tuned agents, maybe some that are more expensive, less expensive, depending on the models you're using, do their tasks, and then contribute back to the overall goal. Guardrails seem important, especially as we get into this agentic behavior. And I think even with that in mind, we're going to see some stuff go off the rails as this gets put into the hand of any young, excited developer willing to hack and trying to make their mark on the world. And if you're interested, they did do a great little video, always simple, sitting here walking through. This will be in the YouTube description. And I think a beginning of a democratization even further, even more than it already has been, of agents in this new autonomous artificial intelligence that's going to be running rampant through our world and really changing the way that we behave with technology and that technology behaves with us. And just one last interesting story just to show how expensive and how technical it is to do this stuff. Breaking: Google owns 14% of Anthropic. This was according to legal filings obtained by the New York Times. We know that Amazon has had a stake in Anthropic, and we know the amount of fundraising that's required to build these models, get the talent that's required, and market into a competitive, saturated world where more and more companies are competing for the users and developers who are interacting with AI, and I would still say a relatively early adoption state. So Google investments now exceeds $3 billion. It's interesting. They're limited to this 15%. They've got no voting rights, no board seat, and they'll loan $750 million this year in convertible debt. So I wonder what the terms are on that debt. But Anthropic valued $61 billion. What a climb up. And it's a very fascinating thing with Anthropic trying to claim itself as the more aligned, the more holistic, the more safe, the more ethical AI, while still needing huge amounts of money and continuing to optimize towards value creation in this capitalistic world that we live in. And as more and more money pours into these companies, at some point it seems to erode the safety teams. It seems to speed up deployment times, shorten quality assurance and testing, and all the other things that comes with trying to compete with other companies that might not have those same guardrails. So a very fascinating time and a little bit of net news coming out of the AI world with this ownership of Anthropic. And love to give one shout out to a Canadian company here doing its best to compete in this world with Cohere. Their new state-of-the-art model, Command AA Canadian, which is open weight 11 billion parameter with a 256K context window. I really do think they're focused nicely on the enterprise space, and they've done a lot of work in other languages, multi-language. I still don't know their market penetration, and it's definitely not comparable to Anthropic and OpenAI, but the technology seems to be pretty strong, and from a technical foundation, they are competing well with these very significant companies. With that being said, got my boy Tasia here to end off another wild week. We're going home to see some family, some friends. Despite all the stuff that's going on in the world, it's an exciting time here for us, and look forward to sharing more. And for everyone who checks out these videos, whether it's the full one or the clips, I appreciate you very much. Always open to your feedback, suggestions, thoughts, conversations, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.